Still there?
I am.
Alrighty. Yeah, I keep these studio lights off in here because I'm hot-blooded as it is. I've got the window open, and that's not good because then you hear all the outside noises. So anyway, I'm trying to cool it down in here because I know it's going to increase by about 10 degrees over the course of our discussion here. Okay, well what I'll do, I'm going to go ahead and we'll start the recorder on here. And I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and do the introduction, and that'll take about a second. You probably won't hear any of this. I wish you could, but you probably won't. And then we'll start with the introduction. So here we are. Okay. All right, so we're starting in the program now. Yeah, I'm a one-man show, so this is always very challenging.
No worries. Take your time.
Okay, I'll do the intro, so here we go. And hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome as you come in. Today, as we're recording this, is the 27th of December, 2019. I'm Roy Potter. Again, welcome. We have a very special guest today, as I've been telling you about, and I'd like to give you a little information about him. Mr. Richard Higgins was a member of the White House National Security Council who was forced out by General H.R. McMaster for a memo that he wrote called POTUS and Political Warfare, where he was trying to warn President Trump of subversive forces that were against him. In other words, this whole coup that's going on. You can see some of the information that Mr. Higgins has been involved in, and I'm going to give you a little bio here. You can go to Unconstrained Analytics. In the description box below is his link to his organization there, and also his Twitter account. So I'm going to read this little memo here for you on his bio and let you know a little bit more about him. By the way, we've already talked about how we're going to address each other, and we've agreed that first names are a little easier, so I'll be calling him Rich and he'll be calling me Roy, so you know. So let me read this to you. Richard Higgins is a senior fellow at Unconstrained Analytics. Higgins was Vice President of Intelligence and National Security for RED Limited Liability Company, a company that develops, tests, and evaluates new combat capabilities for special operations, intelligence, and irregular warfare missions. From 2011 to 2013, Mr. Higgins managed a classified project for Special Operations Command, SOCOM. From 2010 to 2011, he served as the chair of Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict at the National Defense University. In 2004, he formed the Department of Defense's Irregular Warfare Support Program Office and served as the organization's first program manager until June 2010. In this role, he was directly responsible for the creation of several new strategic and operational capabilities. Mr. Higgins has advised the White House, Congress, and foreign governments on strategy, technology, and terrorism-related matters. He is a 2011 Lincoln Fellow from the Claremont Institute. A U.S. Army veteran, I found out just this morning he was an EOD tech. There's a guy for you. That's emergency ordnance disposal. Richard Higgins holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Tufts University, as well as a master's degree in Strategic Security from the National War College. He resides in Virginia. So he has authored many other memos. A couple of them that I'd like to mention here. He co-authored with a member of the Unconstrained Analytics Group, Mr. Stephen Coughlin, and I just want to mention those. And all of these are good reading, and the link again is in the description box below. Remembering the Misremembered Left, the Left's Strategy and Tactics to Transform America, where have we heard that before? And Defeating the Islamic Movement Inside the United States, a Strategic Plan. Rich, I want to thank you for coming. Thank you so very, very much. And
Good day, Roy. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. We've chatted a little bit already, and it's really hard in this subject to know exactly where to go. And I think maybe the best thing to do is kind of what we already did, and that is for you to give a little background information on yourself. Again, probably some of the things I didn't touch in the bio that you you think are important. And then discussing how, just very shortly, how you got into the NSC and what it was that, as you go through the explanation, that H.R. McMaster had a problem with your memo to President Trump.
Okay. You kind of covered the background. I think the simplest point to make is, I always wanted to work in the national security sector, and coming out of college, went into the military, for the specific purpose of getting that military experience in the hopes of transitioning into, one of the three-letter agencies, or in some form or fashion. Again, this is all prior to 9/11, and after getting out of the Army, 9/11 happened, and of course I wanted to get into the fight, so I left. I'd been at the Justice Department. I left there and I went back to the Defense Department and ended up, you mentioned, setting up the first regular warfare office in the Pentagon, and it was in that role where I really came across a lot of the skill sets that became so useful here in the past couple of years in understanding this type of warfare. And I ended up at the National Security Council after having served as a surrogate for President Trump at the convention, the Republican National Convention in Cleveland, and I hosted a couple of radio shows for him. And when he won the election, I was in New York that night, and it was a hand of God type thing. And during the course of the next month or two, I was entertaining a couple different positions. I ended up on the National Security Council working in the strategic planning shop. Just due to bureaucratic reasons, I actually didn't end up working at the NSC until March. So General Flynn was already gone, but I was in contact with him and other folks inside the NSC during that time period. And, we knew, I guess jumping right to the memo would be premature. We knew even during the campaign that what was transpiring was not politics as usual. You had recurrent agitation events where Antifa-affiliated leftist operatives were attacking Trump supporters on their way in and out of Trump events around the country, and then you'd see the propaganda arm come down with the media blaming the Trump supporters who had been attacked. And having won on November 8th, I remember telling General Flynn and telling Steve Bannon and others from the campaign, we're going into Omaha Beach. And the reason I was telling people that is, the government had become occupied, and it was, this collectivist groupthink where multiculturalist, globalist thought was primary, and to the point where the leadership was willing to exclude facts, just exclude fact-based analysis from any of their strategic analysis. And so, going into the NSC, it was every bit as hostile as it had expected it to be. And we saw early on in the transition where, normal, what some people call it the national security blob, but people from the establishment, whether they be establishment GOP or just government bureaucracies in general, had made their way into the transition and were bringing people in that were not 100% aligned with the MAGA agenda. And part of that was, I think, the president was hopeful that the Republican Party would come in behind him and support him to establish a government. Part of it was, collectively, there was a lack of understanding of the nature of his election. And so, one of the things I said about trying to do with my little network of people affiliated with the campaign was to begin to educate them on, what the quote-unquote left. And when I say that, I don't mean just the Democrats. I mean the Democrats and the media and the academics and the corporations who buy into these socialist things. And candidly, a lot of members of the Republican Party had bought into over the previous 3 or 4 decades.
Why do you think that is, if you don't mind me interrupting you? Why is it a power thing? Is it because the institutions have been pushing that for so long? Is it really an insurrection, an invasion, a subversion? What do you think is going on there? Sorry to change your mode here.
I think no problem at all. I mean, I'd like this to be more of a discussion than just talking. I think I don't know how much your audience pays attention to it, but I used to speak on behalf of President Trump during the campaign, and one of the things I would say is our grandfathers were smarter than us. And when I would say that, what I was alluding to is the fact that they understood as early as the 20s and 30s that the Communist International was a real threat. And they set up these networks that operated with this slow, subversive approach over time. And what we see today is really the seeds, the seeds have germinated, they've grown, and they're flourishing now, where, if you send a child to a U.S. public school today, you take a 6-year-old Christian American child and you send them to a United States public school, at age 17, you will get back an atheist, avowed Marxist. And how did we get to that point? And I think, yes, it was a plan. Yes, it was intentional, but so many, the really insidious nature of it is that so many people that participate in this aren't even witting to the fact that they're doing it. All right?
That's interesting.
So many of the Republicans that you come across don't even realize that they're pushing a Gramsci Marxist agenda, or that, in pushing Common Core, they're pushing a Marxist agenda. And so, the first thing that you had to do is kind of awaken people to this. Now, this is the gift that President Trump has given us, right? President Trump has shattered their control mechanism, which was through the information sphere, right? He naturally and intuitively breaks through their propaganda because he refuses to participate in it. And in so doing, they recognize him, President Trump, as an existential threat to their control mechanisms, which is why, if you had Jeb Bush as the president or Marco Rubio as the president, you would not have seen this overreaction from the left. So he's forced them into a crisis-level response just through his intuitive ability to cut through that dialectic rhetoric that they utilize. And so one of the challenges you had in observing what was happening, both to the transition and then early on in the administration, was, well, what's really driving all this? And I think, my concern and the reason I wrote the memo in the first place was, I think there was an underscoped understanding of what we were looking at, right? So we knew there was a political smear campaign going on with the Russia stuff, but it was more than just a traditional political smear campaign because we knew there was an operation underway, but even myself and the guys who candidly helped me put together kind of the thinking behind the memo, we underscoped what we were looking at. And the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act abuses and the signals intelligence abuses and the surveillance abuses were coupled with infiltration by subversives. You had a long-standing propaganda stream pushing the Russia narrative. You had it was a concerted campaign, offensive counterintelligence campaign, and all that implies being run against the President of the United States. Not just the candidate, but the actual president. And so, the purpose of the memo was really threefold. One is to kind of explain to the audience what is political warfare. Two was to explain how the cultural Marxist drivers behind that political warfare operated. And then three, to explain how the information battle space plays out and how it works to control events. And so, trying to compress all that down into a 5-page memo that's readable in 15 or 20 minutes, presented its own challenges. And of course, I wrote it at home, working on it, I guess over the course of, from February, March, and April. And then the final version was probably in May. And, I knew that I couldn't pass it up through the National Security Council chain of command because so many of the individuals above me in that chain of command were, were immersed in that sort of globalist Marxist thinking. And so I had grown a pretty substantial relationship with individuals affiliated with the campaign, and in the hopes of informing several of the people around the president, I passed the memo to them. And again, it's just part of this sort of educational campaign, if you will. And I'm told, although I can't be for sure, the president's never told me whether he has or not. I'm told the president read the memo. I'm told he agreed with the memo. But again, not understanding these types of subversive operations, he then turns to McMaster and says, "Hey, this guy's doing a good job." Well, when somebody like McMaster sees that memo, he does one of two things. One, he either doesn't understand it and so just panics and says, "Oh, it's conspiracy theory, crazy talk," or two, which is what happened, he recognizes that I'm outing him and the people he's working with for subverting the president, and my feet didn't hit the ground and I was out.
Well, I know Esquire magazine, even at the time, called you pure, unadulterated American crazy. And it's interesting how this smear campaign, it's not, like you said, it's not just politics. We're dealing with a real insurrection, a real subversion. And the thing that bothers me, now that we know the history of what happened there, I got to go back to another probably simplistic question, and that is, how did the organizations, especially the Department of Justice, the FBI, the CIA, and like I say, I think I already know the answer to this, but I want to hear your take. How did the agencies, the organizations that we, the Americans, pay for to protect us, turn into our most dangerous enemy? How did that happen?
Well, I think, there's no simple answer to that, Roy. I mean, you can go back, and there were several past abuses of their power, right? And we saw that in the 60s and 70s. We saw it with J. Edgar and the FBI. The difference back then is there was a measure of accountability brought forward, rightly or wrongly. I'm not going to defend everything the Church Commission did. I thought they overstepped in some areas, but there was the ability of the political class to push back. Okay? Today, there is no ability to rein these organizations in. At the same time, and in parallel to it, you have to think, the Chinese, the Russians, all the foreign hostile, the Cubans, the Venezuelans, all these hostile foreign intelligence services have had as a target for 50, 60, 70 years, these organizations. And so, in the Bush era, it was very much the globalist, neocon cabal. And then we had our first, openly communist president in Obama. And of course, this open communist who ran, identifying himself as a community organizer, right out of Saul Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, the communist community organizer. He brings in, all these open and some more closeted Marxists. I mean, Comey has a communist history, Brennan has a communist history, Clapper has a communist history, just across the board. So these institutions, which once were the guardians of the American government and liberty, have now been turned into the guardians of the, I'll call it the uniparty oligarchy, right? Which is globalist in its orientation, it's multiculturalist in its orientation, it's weaponizing non-kinetic capabilities against the American public, and it's Stalin's dream realized in many ways.
Is there any way to turn that around without? I mean, it would seem like to me, these are the guys that carry the guns. How do we? I mean, exposure is one thing, and President Trump's done a great job in that. But a lot of, and I'm going here. A lot of people are asking this question. Barr has been in there now for well over 3/4 of a year, and we're still hearing about things going to happen. And I hate to jump to that, but it seems to me that we kind of know what the disease is. At least we should, and people like yourself are in the government, have been in the government, and understand these things, and yet, by the same token, nothing seems to get done. Now I realize that when you're in dangerous waters, you've got to navigate carefully. I'm not saying we need to be rash here, but by the same token, if no action at all is giving them, actually it's encouraging them, it's emboldening them. And rather than being like, Admiral Farragut saying, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, let's take care of this, it seems like to me there's a conscious effort. Seems like I remember General Flynn saying that, a conscious effort not to do anything. So what would you say to that?
I think that anytime you move against a seditious conspiracy like this, there are a couple of things that we have to be cautious of. First is a heavy-handed response plays into their narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Sure.
Trump the dictator, Trump the
Right.
totalitarian, Trump the time. So we have to be very cautious of that. At the same time, an under-inclusive response allows them to perpetuate and perhaps widen their network. And I think that, when I look at the things that are going on right now, for example, in the state of Virginia with Northam and the Second Amendment stuff, I see those as largely acts of desperation. Right? I mean, these are not being done from a position of strength in a political sense. And what has to happen, in my opinion, is yes, Barr does have to roll up this conspiracy, but he has to do it in such a way that it is about reestablishing the rule of law. I mean, you and I both know the military is just not good at counterinsurgency, irregular warfare type stuff. It's much more effectively handled by the police. The problem in this current situation is that the police are the issue, right? And
True, yes.
So what Barr has to do, and I think this is what he's trying to do. I think Barr is trying to allow the institution time to save itself. And I have not spoken to him about this. This is just me kind of observing things. Now, I don't know if the president told him this. I don't know if this is Barr of his own volition. But he doesn't want to just burn down the entire FBI, for example, right? And I think he recognizes that down at the GS-15, down at the colonel and below level inside the FBI, there are a lot of patriots that want nothing to do with what the seventh floor cabal has been up to. But in order to do that, he has a time limit. Now, the other thing I would say about the time issue, and I've seen some of your broadcasts about that, is the Attorney General and you were in the Army, you know this. He's flying at government speed. Is
Right.
that fast enough? I don't know. I also don't know if he's scoped appropriately with what he's doing with Durham. Okay, meaning, if this seditious conspiracy, and it is in multiple agencies and in multiple organizations, but I don't think it's tens of thousands of people, which is, I think, sometimes what comes across, through the hyperbole on the news and whatnot. Mm-hmm. You're looking at several hundred people that got into positions they shouldn't have been in, and of those several hundred people, maybe 100 to 200 of them were active participants driving this, and those people need to be held to account. Is Durham in a position to be able to deal with that? I don't know. I don't have internal.
Yeah, I worry about the resources that he actually has. We heard about John Huber, who I know I worked with for a number of years, and when I heard he was being put on the case, I went, well, that's not going to go anywhere. And of course, that's pretty much the way it's been. But my concern now is that, and I know there are never Trumpers, and then there are Trumpers forever, and those who because I don't know if it's fear or just complete loyalty, they won't hold the president's feet to the fire on some of these things. What I worry about is that and I see it all the time on with the people that I talk with on my channel and out in the public too. They're very concerned that Trump is not acting, that the good guys are acting frightened, are acting not just reserved but afraid to act. And I fear that if that continues, that despite what the polls say, I don't trust maybe I'm silly on this. I don't trust the regular MSM polls, of course, but I'm not so sure I can trust the administration's polls either. So really, where are the people? What I'm hearing out here is anxiety, depression. What's going to happen to us, because these organizations, if they continue to gain this power and to pull off these really criminal acts against the American people, and use things like under the color of law actions to help politicians, and we could name all sorts of people there. But these acts under color of law against the American people to help and line the pockets of these politicians and these corporations, I hear people starting to lose hope, and that's not a good situation either.
I don't disagree with anything you said, and I'm not going to peddle hope to anybody. I take kind of a clinical look at the situation, and I believe that if you look over the course of the past 4 years in my time of being involved with the president, he has come a long, long way. Having walked into Omaha Beach with a cooler and a lawn chair,
right.
had all of his survivors shot. He set about, and you'll get this because you're military. I mean, the operational sequencing matters, right?
Exactly.
And he has to have the political currency in place and the public support with him in order to go about making some of these larger scale institutional changes that he needs to make. And I think, in the left's desire to control him and their failure, candidly, really, you gotta be honest with me, their coup failed, okay? And Barr is the one who put the nail in the coffin of Mueller, and he did it in just a couple of weeks. And we need to remember, a lot of people throw Mueller. Well, Mueller, within a couple of weeks of taking the reins of the special counsel, he was arresting people. Yeah, he was, but he was coming in at the back end of a 2-year investigation,
right,
where you had already compiled all this information, and he was just putting together the folders and throwing them in front of the U.S. Attorney. Whereas Durham was largely starting fresh. Like you said, Hubert didn't move anywhere, and Durham came in, and he followed the normal institutional protocols, which is, it sounds, bureaucratic and process-oriented, but, the Justice Department, when it's doing its job correctly, that's how it operates. Now, at the individual sub-institution level, for example, at the FBI, I just had dinner last night with a very close friend of mine who's an FBI agent, and he is an absolute patriot. He's aghast at what's happening there. And he told me that, if you go back and you look at the damage that Mueller did, because, back in the day, circa 2000 under Louis Freeh, the FBI was a very field office-oriented organization, and headquarters was very thin. And Mueller, with the influx of resourcing that came in after 9/11, grew the headquarters by a factor of about 9. So you have now deputy assistant, just this massive bureaucratic labyrinth that, it was that control function of that labyrinth that was weaponized against, the opposition political party. They're not necessarily the field offices themselves. And so these type of institutional changes that the president, even if he wanted to make them on day one, he didn't know he needed to, but even if he wanted to, had he set about making those changes, he would have just been attacked relentlessly.
Which he has been anyway, though, frankly.
Correct. So I guess, and then the other thing is you're constantly dealing with this stream of disinformation that's being put out by, various actors that are guessing as to what's going on inside the system. Mm-hmm. Now, I understand that, the lack of information flowing from these institutions, particularly because they come from the intel community, that it's nice to have guys who used to do it, or, were in the intel community, or were U.S. attorneys providing insights. But they, there are some times where rumors become truth.
Right.
And you see these movements then co-opted by I believe perhaps even by bad guys.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I see like the whole Q thing drives me crazy. They're
say that again.
The whole Q thing.
I heard you. I just wanted to emphasize that.
That's so clearly to me. We look, Roy. We do this stuff, right?
Right.
False expectations emotions is a classic motivation and morale killer.
Right.
And so all those people you're talking about who are disheartened because, thousands of bureaucrats are on their way to Gitmo, right? I mean, that's what I worry about.
Yeah, and that's not, of course, that's not how it would happen anyway, and of course you and I know that, yeah, for sure.
Right.
Well, let me move on to just another little thing here. Again, I appreciate you coming on, and you're a very important individual. I'm not trying to brown nose you or anything there, but I know you've got a lot to do, and I'm hoping that you're not just, and I know you're busy in some other areas, but I'm really hoping that you have contacts, and I imagine you still do, in positions of influence where people that understand what you and your colleagues have been saying, that there'll be people that will pay attention. The political warfare is, as you said, not really part of the American political process, at least it hasn't been. But it is a Maoist type of insurgency, and it's, of course, has the Frankfurt School characteristics as well, and destroy it no matter what and rebuild it in the way that you want. What would you see if the right people were in the right places? And I frankly don't know if they are. You've been put on the outside. And I don't know exactly how the classification system works in the White House, but it would seem like to me that it would make all the sense in the world for President Trump to say, "Hey, Rich, come on back in. We need your input." Now, I know that would cause crazy stuff to happen, but like I said, it's happening anyway, and I think it would send a message. So knowing this information about what this political warfare really is, and that it is a Maoist type strategy, how are we going to counter that? What can we do?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember about the Maoist strategy, for those of your audience who aren't familiar with it, I always tell people, everybody's heard of Clausewitz that does military strategy, right? And he is like the ultimate Western strategic thinker. And, any senior officer will be familiar with his writings. But Mao is to political warfare what Clausewitz is to kind of traditional warfare.
Right.
Yet we don't like Mao because Mao was communist, and Mao was short, and he was Chinese, and he had bad teeth. But he was a brilliant strategist. And what he talks about constantly is the need to build his term mass line, right? And I think that where we are right now is you have this movement, that really, I guess, began with the Tea Party. And the Tea Party, kept electing, and the American people kept electing ever increasing Republican majorities, right? In 2010, in 2012, in 2014. Finally, they're so sick and tired of just not getting anything from the Republican establishment that they broke the glass and brought in Trump. And that movement, the MAGA movement, if you will, is the beginning of the counter-revolutionary movement that's going to bring America back. And so what we have to do is we have to, the way you beat a movement is with a movement of your own.
Right.
And it's very important that we get, the serious men, and I use that term, I'm playing upon Hoffer's expression.
Right. Serious
men that are going to pull together the organizations using pre-existing networks or creating new networks as necessary, to formulate our own political power base, right? And I think one of the things that's concerning to me is Mao talks about really 5 lines of operation, right? He talked about the mass line, or what he called the political line of operation. He talks about alliances. He talked about international sanctuaries, which also applies to cyber. And he talked about the use of nonviolence, which is a propaganda and education, so on and so forth. And the thing that's vital for our side to remember is we need to be very careful about them provoking us into violent retaliatory acts.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Hugely important. If there was one thing they want, is for us to turn violent prematurely, because they will use that and bring all their institutional friends to bear against us.
Right.
And I'm amazed, and kudos to your audience and to all the people out there in the MAGA movement who've done an incredible job at resisting the urge to retaliate. There may come a time where violence is necessary, but we're a long way from there yet. And retaining that moral high ground is key. So as they're working across those 5 lines of effort, lines of operation, we need to be thinking about what is our movement doing for political purposes. How are we recruiting new members? How are we reaching school children, etc.? Who are our natural allies? We have some. We have them in places like Europe, where there's emergent nationalist identity movements that some would be worth working with, some won't. How do we exploit the less use of violence against them? For example, with Antifa and these other groups, what does our cyber profile look like? I mean, we have to recognize that Silicon Valley is drifting, hard over to the left.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to create a parallel infrastructure? And then, what are our nonviolent messages? What are the things we want to bring forward? And I think you even see that in the president, where he's been asking at some of his recent rallies, are we at Keep America Great, or are we still at MAGA?
Right.
The audience in general is like, we're still at MAGA. We have a long way to go. And I think the president recognizes that now. So, I'm a little bit more hopeful than you are, I think.
Yeah, I'd say so. But it's good to hear. It's really good to hear.
But I recognize that there's nothing that you're saying that's invalid, and they are appropriate concerns to somebody who's thinking about the strategic planning and the exercises of the things that are coming down the road. And I think it's an important function that you're providing for people to get them thinking about the big picture that way.
Well, I appreciate that, and of course that was my entire intent anyway, and to work off some bad karma, I might say, as well, as you well know, I'm sure. I think I'd like to also ask you about going back to Barr for a minute, because really that seems to be the key, of course, Barr and Durham and really the good folks in the DOD. And I know that sounds a little out at this point, but without the military behind the president and behind the types of things that we stand for, it's really going to be a difficult road. But Barr said something that I know you're aware of when he was giving his talk at the University of Notre Dame, and he said, "This is not decay; it is organized destruction." And then I noticed, I noticed you guys use the same phrase in your papers, and I just want to make sure that the audience, I'm sure most of them already know, but I want to make sure that the audience knows that this isn't just a happenstance. This isn't just something that occurred by accident, that this was an organized takedown of our system, and that these people are really more dangerous than just having, and you've talked about it in your papers, again, it's not just regular politics, that there is actually something else going on here that is trying to destroy the American Republic.
Absolutely. I mean, the communists, and all, you really, to understand the communist movement today, when we wrote that paper, when Steve and I worked on it, we knew we needed to explain for people, how the communists, how the Marxist Hegelians use the dialectic, and they trap you in these circular arguments. And those circular arguments can be about, transgender, or pick whatever issue you want off the evening news today. And really, the purpose of those discussions isn't to solve or discuss or offer opinions. It's always about what the Germans called Aufheben der Kultur, which is negation of the culture. And their target has always been, the Christian Declaration of Independence, constitutional founding of this country, which is the nucleus of the entire American experiment. And they knew that in order to take out the United States as a world power, or more even, I don't know what the right word even is, more surreptitiously to take control of American power.
Exactly.
To fulfill their own interests. Okay?
Right.
And so these natural enemies like communism and the Islamic movement become allies, in order to go about achieving that objective. And very few have really sat back and thought about the big picture, over decades really predicated on 4-year or even 2-year election cycles.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so it's getting people to understand there's an intentionality behind these enemies that it's masked by, they truly are the wolf in sheep's clothing. And it's frightening to me because they've created an entire cultural narrative now that to even speak truth about these enemies is to be labeled a bigot, a xenophobe, a racist, all the terms they
Right.
throw at you.
Right.
Where it has nothing to do with that. It's an understanding and a grounding of what it is to be an American.
Exactly.
And the American political philosophy. And, candidly, most American kids today aren't even taught that,
And in your papers, I'm getting out of the political warfare paper right now that you sent to POTUS and going to some of your other things, but I think you've kind of gone in this direction, and I would like to ask you. It seems to me that part of the solution of this, of course, as you've pointed out, is not to be pulled into these restrictions that the left wants to place on our speech, on our Bill of Rights and those things, but to, as one judge told me, belligerently defend ourselves. In other words, say what you want to say. Don't hold back. President Trump getting up there and saying, "Yeah, you guys are the fake news." He's actually pointing that out. Is that going to help us, or is that just antagonizing a situation that can't be negotiated?
No, it's the only way you beat them. The way you stop the dialectic, the way you stop it in its tracks, is to speak truth to power and damn the consequences.
Amen.
And the president knew this intuitively, and it's why he was elected. And he also recognized that in order to bring his message to the public, he first had to do two things. He had to get a direct communications pathway to them, which Twitter provided for him, and he needed to somehow negate the propaganda arm, which is he calls them fake news, but what he really means is propaganda. So the propagandists are going to lie to you about what I say here today, and if you didn't hear me, I'll tweet it later so you really hear it.
Right.
And the thing being is, one of my favorite books was a book called Abusive Language, Abusive Power by a guy named Joseph Pieper. And it's all about how tyranny begins through the use of words to control thought. And the president, again, intuitively grasped this. And he knew that in order to break through that tyrannical hold they were building over the culture, he needed to shatter that control mechanism. And the way you do it is you don't participate. And so I'll give you an example. I love this example because it happened a few weeks ago. I thought it was really funny. So the president was on his way out to his helicopter on the South Lawn, and there were a bunch of reporters there shouting questions at him, as they typically do. And one of the reporters is shouting at him, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the avowed communist, by the way,
Right.
says that you're a racist. And the reporter yells again, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says you're a racist. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says you're racist. So he turns and he looks at the reporter and he goes, who? And the reporter says, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She says you're a racist. And he goes, who cares?
Yeah.
And he walks onto the helicopter.
That's classic. Yeah. That's
how you stop their attack, right? And your judge gave you good advice, and I think that willingness to speak truth to power, it's the only real weapon you have.
I appreciate that, and I so appreciate you coming today. I don't want to take up a whole lot more of your time, but I think I'd like to kind of end on this for this session. I don't want to, like I say, hold you on too long, but I think this is a real important part, and it might seem a little, a little too broad, but I'd kind of like to get your take on your worldview, so to speak, where you see where we are now and the prognosis of where we can get if we can actually fix this thing.
The worldview. I think that we interrupted a slow forming tyranny that had been slowly creeping into place over several decades. And I think that we caught it in time. I mean, I'll use a cancer analogy. We caught it before it had completely metastasized, but we may have to amputate, right? I mean, that's.
I understand.
Okay,
Right.
so there are certain things that are just too far gone and may not be salvageable. And candidly, the type of interventionist approach may or may not even be politically achievable in the next 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, like I said before, the hope I have is that the MAGA movement is real. And I get, like I said before, I get really concerned about things like COUP and these other things because they reek of classic demotivation, demoralization campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very important that we stay focused on the reality of what's confronting us. The other thing is, I don't put all my hope in man, ever, right? And I think it's really important that we stay girded to our spiritual foundation as we kind of go through this. I mean, it could be everything from the next 3 or 4 years, the institutions heal themselves and we start moving out again in a smart way. The wild card in all of this, candidly, is the international actors that are observing this. Okay, they're not benign characters sitting back and watching this. The European Union is my personal opinion, they are an enemy organization of this country now.
Yep.
Completely taken over by the Marxists. They are the neo-Soviet Union. Red China is there, executing their own opium war through the synthetic opium fentanyl that they're pushing into the country.
Right.
So all of these external actors are participating in this as well. The two biggest questions that I have are, number one, can we take back the corporate culture, which is important. Right now they've made this strange Faustian bargain with the socialists because they see it as a potential cost-saving enterprise. And number two, and I think it's the most urgent, and the president really, I hope, makes a concerted effort to do it, is can we claim, meaning the MAGA movement, can we claim domain of one political party? Meaning, can we get the Republican Party to be a bloc MAGA party and support this, this American restoration, if you will? Because right now, I mean, Mitch McConnell, he is not allowed a single recess appointment by Donald Trump.
Yeah, I've really wondered about that. I don't, yeah, exactly, yeah.
So those are.
And then you got the likes of Mitt Romney, of course, and that's another problem. So.
Right, but it's the thing that concerns me more than anything. And if you go back and you study Soviet active measures campaigns, or even the Chinese communist subversive campaigns, or Mao's political warfare strategies, getting control of the conservatives was always the key mission of their intelligence service. And what worries me is, when Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell see the MAGA movement as a greater threat than the communist tyranny that Obama's people were building.
Crazy.
It's scary.
It is.
That gives me great pause.
And understandably, and of course, that's exactly how I feel about it. And I guess I just have one more question for you, and this might seem a little out of the box, but when you were removed from the NSC, there was another gentleman that was removed at about the same time, and his name was Ezra Cohen Watnick, and I'm sure you know who he is.
Sure.
Apparently, he was sent over to the DOJ by President Trump, and there was a lot of speculation at the time about why that was done. So 2 questions about Mr. Watnick. I think he's a patriot. I think he's a good guy. I think he's one of us, so to speak. That's the first thing I'd ask you, is if that's true. And the second thing would be, if you have any inkling, without spilling any information that you can, if you have any inkling about what his real purpose was as far as President Trump was concerned for sending him over there.
Well, I can't get too into the personnel stuff, but only because I don't know.
Okay.
What they tell us. I do know that he did not end up over there.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
So he never ended up over there, but I don't know where he is today. I can tell you that there was a group of us that were working to try and arrest what was happening. A lot of the stuff that you see online, it's not factual. Or what they'll do is everybody talks constantly about a certain admiral who's orange Trump and all the generals doing that.
Yeah, I was gonna bring that up actually, but I thought maybe. But go ahead. Yeah, no, that's right.
That's just a bunch of bunk.
In other words, you're saying Admiral Rogers didn't go, as I understand. Sorry to interrupt you, but this is the type of thing I think is so important. Admiral Rogers probably didn't go to the Trump Tower for the reasons that we all have been led to believe, is what you're saying.
Correct. There are just people. Again, I understand they're operating with a lack of information, but you're creating heroes that aren't heroes, and you're ignoring the people who are when you do that. And there was a small group of folks who were able to decipher some, and each of us picked up a piece of what was happening. And it wasn't like I saw it all and wrote it all up. It wasn't like that. It was a small group of patriots inside who recognized what was happening, and we started working together on this stuff. And the first thing we wanted to do is get rid of, for example, the holdovers from the Obama administration that McMaster wouldn't let us. Right. Right. I mean, simple things like that. But even with all of us, and then, there were less than 20 of us, but a group of us, and all of us had our own individual networks. But the guy I think who deserves more credit than anybody is not Admiral Rogers. It's Devin Nunes.
Correct. Yes.
Because he was the one guy who was in a position, because the Senate and the Senate Select Committee on Intel was a write-off. They were participants in witting too much of what was happening. Devin Nunes was the one guy who was in a position to do something from an oversight perspective, and he did. And you'll get this, it's a military thing. Nunes was not given that committee because he was a boat rocker. And when he started asking the hard questions, they turned their guns on him, and the next thing he was being accused of being a Russian agent.
Exactly.
And they had investigations opening on him, and it was fantastic to see that those investigations failed, but you know how it is. Once you've been in a gunfight, you know how to handle yourself in the next gunfight.
Exactly.
And so Nunes, he got trial by fire, and now he's one of the best guys pushing this stuff across the board. I mean, absolute. I don't use the term hero very often. Certainly never as a congressman before. But he is a real hero.
I agree. And you have said that if we're to have, using probably a term I shouldn't use here, you said if we're going to trust anyone, it should be Nunes and Durham. I notice you didn't say Barr. But, and of course that's if Durham has the resources and the ability, well, he has the ability, if he has the backing to take this thing forward to where it needs to go. And so that's really what we're looking for next, the exposure that Nunes helped, and then what Durham's after.
Yeah, Roy, what I'd say on the Barr thing is, I have friends who worked with Durham and vouched for him, and I've worked myself with Nunes and his staff, so I can vouch for him. I've never worked with Barr. He came out of retirement back into this, and nobody I knew inside the system knew him. So that doesn't mean we don't trust him. I just can't put my own personal, I know this guy, I know what he's about. I have to say, his public statements have been excellent.
Yes, absolutely.
His statements about Soros have been excellent.
Excellent.
Whether or not he has a full, comprehensive understanding of the command and control and underground and infrastructure and propaganda, I don't know. I just don't know. But I'm hopeful.
Well, I think that's a good way to look at it, and that's kind of where I've been. I've vacillated, as you probably know from listening to my videos. I vacillated on the intentions of President Trump and of course Barr. I never did trust Sessions, but I find myself, people find fault with me for vacillating this, but I look at myself as kind of like a referee in a game. I'm not going to make friends, but I'm going to call it the way I see it. But I do have the hope, and I I anticipate that there's a vector here, even if we might be, kind of sailing with, taking zigs and zags, that there's a vector in the right direction if we don't wait too long to take action. And that's really the only thing I would say about it.
Well, I think that's fair, and I'd also say that much like Flynn, I always used the Saving Private Ryan movie, right? The Higgins boats land and the ramp comes down, and Flynn was the guy that got shot in the head instantly.
Yeah.
And Sessions was a litter patient the remainder of his time in there. I mean, he basically was emasculated day one by recusing himself.
Right.
The institution threw him in a box and stuck him in a corner, and Rosenstein and his crew just did what they wanted. And it's going to be very interesting to see how Durham handles that part. I mean, that's one real curiosity I have about things. We talk a lot about Brennan and Comey and all, the holdover Obama people. But, one of the things that I think is far more insidious about what happened is the people inside the Trump administration itself who are part and parcel of this.
Yes.
As they did the Carter page renewals.
Right.
I have to believe that the National Security Advisor, the Assistant Attorney General, they all knew. And then I'm really interested to see how far Durham pursues those lines of investigation, because I candidly, I'm more interested in that than I am in what happened prior to.
Yes, exactly. I agree. Rich, I so much appreciate you coming on. Like I said, I didn't want to keep you much over an hour, and we're approaching that now. I just want to thank you for this. I wanted to have kind of a 60,000 foot view from your perspective, and I think that we've managed to do that. And so rather than getting into all the, I could talk to you for hours, as you said when we were texting back and forth. You said you could talk for hours and hours on this, and I have no doubt that's the case. And hopefully there will be more men like you, and I'm going to say it that way. I hope there are more men like you. We have some women standing up, but I hope there are more men like you who will do this really hard work. Putting yourself in harm's way, basically, is what you're doing. Having been an EOD guy, that doesn't surprise me. But I just want to thank you for everything that you've done. You really are. Again, I'm not brown-nosing you here. I'm sincere in this, and I have a very dear friend who's a Republican in California who has a lot of respect for you as well, and he was ecstatic when he found out I was going to talk to you. We consider you a hero, and we thank you for what you've done. And please keep it up, and give my regards to all of your colleagues there at Unconstrained Analytics. I would really appreciate that. Thanks a lot, ladies and gentlemen. We've had Rich Higgins on. Thank you. You have a great day, Richard. I'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had Rich Higgins on the line. I hope you enjoyed that. We looked at this thing from, like I said, a 60,000 foot level, and we didn't get into a lot of particulars that we could have, but possibly maybe in the future we'll be able to have Rich on again. But I think that'll give you kind of an insight as to what is really going on without having all of the rumor, hopium, misinformation, disinformation. There's a lot of that out there, ladies and gentlemen. Even with the training I've had and the exposure that I've had and the experience, you can get fooled. And what we need to do, I think, and Rich Higgins basically said it, we need to try to move forward and stand up individually and as a people against this menace, this infiltration, this subversion of the communist leftist Marxist program. And if we can do that, and it takes some courage, getting hit in the head with bike locks and being called names and whatever, those things aren't pleasant. But as Rich said, we hope that we can avoid any serious escalation in violence. And I think if we show a little moxie up front, a little determination, a little fearlessness up front without having to respond in an aggressive way, that maybe this thing will turn around. As I've often said, and Rich alluded to it, our spiritual position is probably even more important than whatever we could do politically or physically, because if we don't change ourselves first, we certainly aren't going to change anything else. And I do believe that if we open our hearts and minds and receive the good spirit, I'll just say it that way for now, and cultivate that and respond accordingly, that we might just be able to turn this whole thing around